Hello, my friends, and welcome to this, what I know is going to be an insightful interview on communication and influence with my dear friend and fellow changemaker, Bev Hancock. In a world where communication often falls short, Bev believes in the transformative power of conversations that truly connects and create change. She often refers to George Bernard Shaw, who said the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. I could not agree with him more. Bev understands that our global or personal conversation often needs to be revised with people talking at each other rather than truly engaging. She challenges the status quo and invites us to consider a different approach. What if every conversation is guaranteed to produce a different version of your future? This perspective highlights the potential for talks to shape our lives and leadership. As a conversational leadership expert, that is a difficult word to say, Bev specializes in navigating the complexities of fast-moving and uncertain times, which we definitely live in. She holds the space for impactful conversation and builds the capacity to turn every interaction into a force for positive growth and change. Through her Fuel, Ignite, Accelerate approach, Bev helps leaders reimagine their experiences in various settings, whether on stage, as an engagement specialist, global speaker, or facilitator. She excels at creating interactive and energizing environments. Bev expertise extends to designing strategic facilitation for hybrid leadership conversation, developing customized and human-centered learning journeys, and providing executive coaching to position teams for success in the new world of work. Bev's work is deeply rooted in Ubuntu principles, which recognize humanity's interconnectedness with phrase, I am because we are. She believes in harnessing the magical and wise truth held within the language and practice of Ubuntu, infusing compassion and power into leadership communications. I am beyond excited to learn from Bev, who I know will share her insights and wisdom in this interview, guiding us forward toward more effective and transformative conversations where genders don't matter. So be prepared to discover new ways to communicate, influence, and foster positive change in your personal and professional life. And with that, I say, welcome, Bev.
Wow, that was probably, I think I'm going to hire you as my PR person. That was probably the most awesome introduction I have ever heard. Thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome.
Yes.
Let's just dive in. We both of us love deep conversation. I just want to start by asking you, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of leadership beyond genders?
I think, Rúna, and maybe this is coming from my position as a mom of two adult sons, is that I think that there is a conversation way beyond the one that we're having now. That if we were to have the world that we create for our grandchildren would be a very different place. And having been a single mom, where to a certain extent I've had to assume the mantle of both mom and dad in the relationship to a large extent, I think that in many ways we limit ourselves in our very own boxes and how we see ourselves, and also the way that we allow other people to see us. And I think if we can get beyond that, I think that it will be extraordinarily powerful, and it will transform society as we know it.
Allowing other people to see us. That's a big one. Do you believe it's humanly possible for us to achieve that?
I certainly do, simply because I think I've seen it in practice. There are some conditions, though, that I think will need to change in order for us to have those conversations, because the rules of society want to. Society loves to regulate, as does the human brain. It loves to regulate and it loves to put things in boxes. And I think that in the conversations that I've had with change leaders who are emotionally mature and who can look beyond the very polarized narratives that make up so much of our world at the moment, they are opening up a new conversation, but it's a quiet conversation. It's a quiet conversation that has to move beyond the noise of social media. It has to move beyond the noise of political rhetoric and, some of the what I call the messy conversations. Ultimately, with that level of leadership conversation where we are seeing each other differently, we're opening up spaces, we're willing to handle the both and the paradox of this whole conversation. I think that I'm seeing a growing hunger amongst mature leaders to have a very different conversation.
Yeah, that sounds promising, and something to look forward to. And I agree with you. I think it is happening as we speak. And it is a quiet thing at the moment. Maybe we experience it as a quiet thing, or we're just listening to the other noise when you say that. Now, you are, in my mind, an absolute genius when it comes to communication and seeing people for who they are and influence at such a deep level. Can you share with us your story? How did you become such a master? And what conditioning did you have to overcome?
Wow, that's a big question, Rúna. I think that, interestingly enough, the place that my story was not so much about where I ever saw myself going, but where I needed to be to give my children the future that I wanted from them. And that, to a certain extent, is the nature of the, and I'm going to call it maternal rather than female perspective. I think as mums, we always want the best for our children, as do dads. I'm not
Parents,
denying that. As parents that we did. And I think that it was an extraordinary journey that I can only say took place one step at a time. There is, with the complexity of life, there's no manual for how to do this. And I think this is where the power of conversation and communication comes in. And right at the beginning, after my divorce, when I became a single mom, I had to step out of the box of being a minister's wife, of having a very defined role in the small community that I was in, into something that was a lot more unknown. And I think that is probably what sparked the need to understand how one steps into the unknown. So, I had two young boys that I had to look after. I knew that what I was really good at was computers, amongst other things. So I've always enjoyed the tech space. But I think that I've always enjoyed connection and relationship. I think that has always been a fundamental value to me. The people around me, the people who are really important to me, I don't have a lot of them, but those that I do form what I like to call my magic circle. And I think it's in that magic circle that the real story sits. Because as I moved through this process, I had to look at who I was, because it's a lot easier to look at who you're not. I had to find an inner core of strength as a single mom with no qualifications, with very little job experience, to step into a future that had to be so much bigger than I was. And I'll never forget, my brother told me a story. He's a very successful businessman. And he said if a client asks him to build a rocket ship, he just says yes and then goes back to his office and his drawing board and he figures it out.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the most profound pieces of advice that I did have. The other one that was really profound was a previous boss of mine. As I was moving out of being a secretary or administrative assistant and moving into my own business, I said to him, I'm absolutely terrified because I have no safety net. Mm-hmm. And his response to me was, you are your own safety net. And I think it was those two statements that really opened up the future for me. And long story short, it was day by day, and it was one conversation at a time. There's no recipe to being a successful single mom. But if you sit with your kids and you are open to having conversations with them, you are open to being wrong. You're open to recognize that you learn as much from your children as they do from you, both as a parent and as a leader. If you are open to just keeping the conversation going, mm-hmm. it makes the environment that you're in just so much more powerful. And you ask the question, what are the conditions that you have to overcome? I think that a big part of it for me is that I'm a natural introvert. So for me, stepping out into a public space is not easy. I remember the first time that I had to pick up the telephone to try and phone a prospective client as I started my own business, because that was the only road that I could take that would give my kids what they needed. I was absolutely terrified. The fear was literally sitting here as I picked up that telephone. And one of the main reasons, and I think that a lot of women do battle with this, is that we want to be perfect before we step into the arena. Mm-hmm. Whereas actually the only way to do it is just to step into the arena and believe in yourself that you have got what it takes to face what you need to face in that moment. And that was like a 10, 15-year journey for me, just navigating one unexpected, one unknown at a time, figuring out and having to believe in myself. I had a very low self-image growing up, very, very low self-image. That's something else that I had to overcome. My sister was the genius. My brother was incredibly talented. And I was always known as the normal average one. And it was actually interesting because it had a very positive side to it as well. And I think in our conversations we've had around boxes is that you've got to look both ways. Yeah. And funny enough, being the normal average one meant that people were continually surprised when I did things well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was only, and I'm really sad to say this, because I really would love to speak to young people and say, try and do this earlier. Mm-hmm. It was only really about 10 years ago that I dealt with the issue of not being enough. And I had achieved 2 master's degrees. I'd had a successful business at that point, and I was still questioning myself. And I think that was one of the major conditions. And certainly when we have the gender conversation, that's one that comes up a lot in terms of how do you step forward with confidence? How have we been conditioned as a society, as women in a society, to step forward with confidence? We've always been told to be demure, to step back, to allow people who know more than we do to step forward. And I think that's probably been one of the major factors for me in terms of where I am today. And I think the one lesson that I had to learn, and when I was in London sharing with the Women's Economic Forum there, I said, put yourself in a room that you don't belong, and then belong. Mm-hmm. And that's probably what has got me here today. And from a conversational point of view, understanding the power of every conversation to get you there is probably what has informed my communication journey. I would like to think that I've taken the communication journey for leaders and made it real. Made it every day, make it one moment at a time, rather than it's a concept or a set of academic skills that you have to learn. Conversations happen in the moment. And how do we have those so that we will make a difference and change the world?
So really being in that mindful space and watching out for our responses and seeing that it's not about the next conversation, it's about this conversation. That is, and then being able to reflect afterwards. So what was it about that conversation that nurtured, that I felt I was, for me, always talking about energies. I have such a fire in me that it's always about, did I contribute? Did I give value? Did I allow that person to shine enough? You know, it's kind of, those are the questions that automatically pop up for me when I reflect. I guess it can be different things for different people on that level, but being able to do that, and rather than beating up the earlier version of yourself, to see where, okay, what am I going to go do differently next?
Rúna, there were two particular conversations I remember having. One was when I was at university doing my coaching masters, and we did a session on the difference between being and becoming. And at that moment, I recognized that I was always living in the becoming stage. And I think it was at that moment that I realized that those two, they're two different places. And the being is a much quieter place, and yet we are always moving out of it rather than allowing ourselves to stay in the being place. And that's where the conversations with ourselves and others become most important. And then the second, really, I was listening to a video by Eckhart Tolle. It's also in his New Earth book. And he talks about purpose, because I've always been very goal-driven, very purpose-driven. My kids used to laugh at me because every year we would sit down and have the goals conversation, every year. And I was always moving towards something bigger. I've always wanted to make a difference in the world. I've always wanted to leave a legacy. And for me, that always was my big purpose. And he made a statement that has been so profound, because it's a both and statement. He said, what is your primary purpose and what is your secondary purpose? Your secondary purpose is what you want to achieve in the world. Your primary purpose is what you are doing right now.
Repeat this, please.
Okay, so your secondary purpose is what is still coming. It's that thing in the future that you are heading towards. But if you see your primary purpose of being in this moment, so right in this moment, you and I are having a conversation. Nothing else is more important than this conversation. And as I started internalizing that, because I had to go away and think about it, because it was jarring my brain. And
exactly.
Everything that we've learned about purpose is that big magnetic thing that's pulling us towards the legacy we're going to leave in the world and all of that kind of thing. And then I realized that the quality of this conversation is going to make a profound difference to lives of others in the future. And what we put into this conversation will open a door for somebody. It will drop a new concept. There will be an aha moment. You and I together are now combining our energies to have a conversation that we actually don't know how powerful it will be in the lives of others. But if we're having a distracted conversation, like, oh, I've got something on at in an hour's time, and my mind's busy thinking about that, then I'm not actually with you in this conversation.
No.
And there is a beautiful word, and we've shared this before, coming from the African language, the Zulu language in South Africa, and that's the word sawubona, and it means I see you.
Saborna.
Yeah, Saborna.
I see you.
I see you. And as you see me and I see you in this conversation, we have created a conversational space that is profound. And if we see the next 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes, however long the conversation takes, to extract the value from what we're doing now, instead of being distracted, instead of being in the next moment, in the tomorrow, in the next week, in the book, in the whatever it is, the value that we bring to now determines what that bigger future is going to look like. And that helped bring me back into the now and to be fully present.
That is really, really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I see you. It reminds me of, when you're saying that, it reminds me of, we had conversations about, I'm guessing that this is in most religions, but the Christian religion, about treat your brother like you would like to be treated, and for some reason it's only your brother, not your sister or siblings. But speaking of leadership beyond gender, but one of those things that we learn and it is embedded into our psychic. And I have actually always questioned this. I understand what it means, but I actually always ask myself, shouldn't it be the other way around? Shouldn't I treat another person like that person likes to be treated?
I
then
would
I can see that.
agree. And in reframing that, I think what that does for me, and it's probably talks to my general discomfort with the gender discussion. Right. But it's not actually only the gender discussion, it's the person discussion. Is that when we are looking through our eyes and our experience and treating them how we would like to be treated, we're not seeing them.
No.
We're not seeing them, we're not connecting with their story, with their lived experience. And we're not honoring who they are as an individual. And with all of the labels that we are putting on all of these things, is that the minute we start putting gender labels, and in conversation, I get very frustrated with this, because we kind of recreating stereotypes as we're trying to get out of the box. The only thing we do is creating new boxes.
We're manifesting them.
Yeah, we're absolutely manifesting them. And ultimately, if we are going to ever come to a far more mature conversation, it is about who I am in all my humanity. And I'm watching the rhetoric and the narratives and the search for identity, because I think the search for identity is a very big one for a lot of people. And I see things being broken down into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller bits, but we don't seem to be getting to the greater whole.
No.
And I think this is where the whole concept of being fully human, it comes with its own language. So, and this might be quite controversial for somebody, for some people listening to this. I know that at the moment, one of the big questions, particularly young people are asking, is what are your pronouns?
Yeah.
Now pronouns are great labels for gender. Okay, so the difficulty for me is that I have been told in my life that I think like a man. All right. I am fairly assertive. I am not always polite. All right. I sometimes miss the undercurrent of kind of what's happening, because I'm human. It's me.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet with my if I think of my business partner, who is a man, all right, he is deeply intuitive. He is deeply compassionate, to the point that when we're having a business discussion, I have to allow for an extra hour to do the deep stuff so that I can get to business. And I think what the most freeing narrative. So when I went on LinkedIn, and I did this very respectfully and very consciously, because everybody puts their pronouns there, I've put fully human there.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, I think in terms, and it's coming back to the conversational leadership and intelligence, we are languaging stereotypes. We are saying that collaboration is a female leadership characteristic. And we are saying that to be a strong, bold leader is a male leadership characteristic. Yeah. And so what we're doing is, by assigning these genderized characteristics to human qualities, they are increasingly dividing us. And unfortunately, the dividing conversation is getting more and more fragmented, rather than more and more integrated. By the same token, though, one has to also be aware that you must not dismiss the need for people to understand their identity, to embrace their identity. So once again, it comes back to the both and, I mean,
yeah, exactly. I'm with you on that one.
It's always been the both and.
It's been very interesting, because another thing also, when you're talking about this, because I relate to that same label. I'm too straightforward. I'm not diplomatic enough. I'm not caring enough. I have all of these labels that have been put on me that I'm not enough of. And what was I found so interesting, when specifically was people in our network, Bev, people that are often seen as leaders in the personal development field, they kept on telling me that I needed to step into my feminine power. And I could not understand why I got so frustrated every time I got that label on me. You need to step into your feminine power, be more feminine. And it wasn't until we started to look into, doing the normal boxes, breakfast clubs, conversations, where we go deeper into what does those labels mean to us. I saw that in my psychic, in my soul, I felt that things that were labeled as feminine was weak. It was trapped. You're not free to be yourself. And it was vague. It was like, it was artificial in some ways. And when I noticed that doesn't mean some other people have a totally different perspective on this, because we're all different on this. But just for me, when I saw that, I understood why I was fighting against it. Because I thought, when someone said you have to step into your feminine power, what I heard was, Rúna, you need to be weak. You need to be let go of your power, and you need to be artificial. and that was like, as against everything that I stand for. But it's such a learning process. Another thing that I've also learned in this, what I've also found so interesting, and every one of us is learning on our own ways. And with that, what is considered to be feminine and what is considered to be masculine, is when it confuses me. I don't know if it confuses you, but it confuses me why we need to label some traits as either or. And to explain it, people say, well, you have both. And I'm still thinking, okay, if we can't capture two things at the same time because we're so black and white, why are we complicating this? Why not talk about a trait that you love to you're caring, that you are collaborative, that you are straightforward, that you are fast forward driven. Why can't we use those words rather than labeling it as being something that is a male, stereotypical male or stereotypical woman? What is your view on that?
So a couple of things. Somebody made a statement the other day, and I had to go away and think about it. Is the reason why we create stereotypes is it's because it makes us feel safe.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, the brain, the minute you give the brain a label, the brain is happy because it knows which box to put things in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our brains really are a collection of boxes. It likes to have the known. And I think that perhaps having been, I mean, you and I have both been involved in the women's movement for many years. I mean, we've spoken in women's groups, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that there is, for many women, and certainly coming from Africa, women are emerging. They are starting to find out who they are. And I think it's been very important for them to be acknowledged, for them to find that feminine strength. All right.
Yeah.
However, I think that we need to look at the real potential of what that means. And if we look at the Black Panther movie, all right.
Yeah.
It was the first movie I have seen that Black women were really portrayed as warriors, all right, and as strong women, and as women who are involved in science and in and they have, it's not that they have no fear, but as I watched it on screen, it was like somebody did this. And I think that there has been a need, and I think I really acknowledge it, coming from such a male-driven environment. I mean, if we go back to the 1950s, we all the rules for living were created, I think, in the 1950s, and they have very, very little relevance today. But I think those are a lot of the stereotypes that we're battling, and I think that there is a need for women to awake, and I think there is a place for these lovely sisterhood conversations and all of that sort of thing. I think, though, that there's always a shadow side. And the shadow side, as I'm seeing it at the moment, is that we are creating a new set of stereotypes that are now excluding the male voice. And being the mom of two sons and having done what I can to bring my kids, my two boys up as mature, empathetic, caring young men, and I really believe that I did a pretty good job with that. All right. Young men are coming and saying to us, we want to have the emotional conversation. I catch the tube in London and I hear men on the phone to their girlfriends or to their friends having these lovely, messy conversations that we naturally associate with women's conversations.
Yeah.
And we're also, the women's movement has also got so strong that I think one of the unintended consequences is that we are continually shutting down men who would like to be part of the conversation and not allowing them to do that. And I think, just going back to language, we language our worlds. And if every time a man says something, you turn around and you use mansplaining, patriarchy, all of the big words that are coming out, and we use these words as weapons. And so what we're doing is that somebody wants to come into a conversation. Yes, they might be doing a bit of mansplaining, and I love.
That's their conditioning.
It's their conditioning, yeah. Could we be having a more human conversation? And it comes back to the thing that I really believe that if we start having a conversation at this point in time, you and I can't say, this is right, this is wrong. We can only say, this is right for me, and this is wrong for me. And when it comes down to, we were created as being such beautiful, unique creatures. There's only a single recipe. After the recipe that created Rúna, they destroyed the recipe. There isn't another one.
Yeah.
You have your own unique DNA code. And yet what we want to do is that we want to say, Rúna and Bev, you're the same, because you both, we now have given you a label that we're comfortable with. So I really think, and this is where the power of conversation, and maybe this is what the big thing for me that moved me from formal leadership thinking, and don't get me wrong, I still do a lot of that, but what is the role of conversation in that? Is that very often we want to take the big frameworks and apply them to everybody. Whereas when you bring it down to the individual conversation, you can say, where in the big framework do you and I have our greatest potential? And what do you have to bring to the party in terms of your strengths? And what do I have to bring to the party in my strengths? And then it becomes it's almost like little atoms building up into something bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the Ubuntu philosophy as I am because we are, it acknowledges both. It acknowledges the unique individual and their impact on the greater whole. And I would love to see us having this conversation very, very differently going into the future.
I think it's a key thing for us to create a world where we have leadership beyond gender. That we can do that. I am because you are. I see you. We can learn a lot from Africa.
I think we certainly can. And I think also in terms of having this conversation in the European environment, all right. Perhaps one of the warning signals as we have this conversation is to a certain extent for those of us who have been brought up in quite and I'll use the word privileged environments or fairly homogeneous environments, all right. The concepts are a lot simpler. When we start looking at intersectionality of where you see the gender coming in, as women, we have had certain challenges in society. We've also had certain gains. I love being a woman. I love flirting. I love it when somebody tells me that I'm beautiful. I love wearing a good, really stunning pair of high shoes sometimes. So I love that part of my femininity, but it's only part of who I am. And I think as we start understanding people's identity, and I think this is where we get the pushback to don't have the gender conversation, is that if you have a woman who is then a Black woman living in Africa and in her society, she has been in a very subservient role, role within her community. She might be of a different sexual orientation. She might be of a certain neurodiversity orientation. And these add the complexity because with each one, different elements are coming into the conversation. And so often you will hear people say, I don't see color, I don't see gender, I don't see, difference. All right, so we're all together. If you cut me, we all bleed with red blood. We're all the same under the skin. I mean, we've all seen these conversations. I think perhaps the defining language for me is that we need to shift from describing who we are to defining who we are. And therein lies the bridge for me. If I look at you and I see a white woman from Iceland who is a change maker, who has blonde hair and beautiful sparkling eyes, who I know has a fire energy in her, she's a mom, she does crazy things, she's not scared to put herself out there. That means that I am describing the person who I see. I'm not going to say because you're a woman, I'm going to treat you like this, or because you are a woman of color, I'm going to treat you like this. And the other day, my business partner sent me the most awesome quote, and it went, the definition is in the hands of the definer, not the defined. And that was the statement I was looking for that connects to why we have so many difficulties with all of these different labels, is because sitting at the kernel of this is a power source, which, let's face it, is still very white male dominated. If you look at the world as we know it in power structures, we have an older leadership who don't seem to know that they can retire. I mean, if you have a look at the age of world leaders, it's actually quite scary. And the halls of power are the definers.
Yeah.
And the defined are trying to get balance. They're trying to get a level playing field. They're trying to get a voice at the table. They're trying to say, listen to me. Their frustration is welling up. If we could move the center of power from treating groups by how we define them, we change the system.
Yeah.
We need to find a way of changing that conversation.
Yeah, it is when we stop expecting, assuming, making an assumption that just because we put people into boxes to understand things and to be safe, like you mentioned, the problem starts when we start to treat them and expect them to behave as the box.
Because every box comes with a list of instructions. Yeah. This is how you use the box. Yeah. And what I'm hearing is that people are saying, I want you to see my difference. I want you to see my color. What they're actually saying is, I want you to acknowledge my lived experience. I want you to see me, feel me in all my glory, in all my power, in all my, whatever I look like, who I am, what I've come from, the richness that I bring to the world. And if we start focusing on each other's lived experience and recognizing that my lived experience will never be yours and vice versa, and how can I step into your lived experience and support you, rather than you coming to me and saying, teach me from your lived experience.
Yeah. Tell me how to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So very good. Bev, I love this conversation, like always when we go deep. We could go forever and ever, but I'm going to wrap it up, and just one question in the end. When do you want to see the world being in the state that we can have conversations, seeing each other, being who we were born to be, not conditioned to be?
That's a very interesting question. I would love to see it in my lifetime. I do know that we've been having the same conversations for 300 years and they're not working. So I really don't want to see another 3 years. I think, though, that I would like to bring it down. I would like to see that happening today. And I would like to see that happening tomorrow and the day after and the day after. And I think it comes down to our scope of control is everybody in our magic circle. Am I creating an island of excellence? Am I creating an island of interconnectedness in my magic circle? And then, Rúna, if your magic circle and my magic circle can come together, all right, and create a bigger island of excellence, and then yours, mine, and Nick's island can come together and make a bigger one. And I think this is where the time frame of conversations makes such a difference. Conversations are today. Conversations are now. As you use this data, this conversation, and all of the things that you're doing in your book, you are creating another connection in your magic circle. It will start with people who have the maturity to do so. It will start with people who get this. And before we know it, if we keep saying, I'm powerless because I cannot affect this big future, it's never going to happen. But if I say today, this conversation made a difference, and tomorrow the next one, and tomorrow the next one, because we're sending those people out into their own magic circles. So we change the world one conversation at a time, one conversation, one relationship at a time, because it's the connection and the conversation is the glue that kind of keeps it together. So I think there are two time frames. There's now, and when I die, if I could see people having conversations as fully human beings, I will die happy.
Wow. That's the intention that I'm going to be setting with you. With that, I want to thank you so much for your insights. This has been absolutely brilliant, and what a contribution to the book, Leadership Beyond Genders. Thank you.
Always a joy to work with you. Thanks, Rúna.